What's up, valued members of Team Success? This is Ro, your best friend at JMSB. So here I was asked a question for ECON 203 Macroeconomics pertaining to the Solow growth model. So let's have a look. Question 3. Suppose technology remains constant while labor force grew at a rate of 3.4% a year, capital stock grew at a rate of 3.3% per year, and the share of labor income in national income was 60%. How fast would potential GDP grow? So in this particular case, what we're essentially dealing with is the Solow growth model for growth in YP. In my opinion, whenever we're dealing with such a problem, the very first step that I would recommend is to simply go through the problem and to identify the variables that are involved. So in this particular case, the variables that are offered are as follows. We can see that technology is going to be constant. Because technology is going to be constant, that means that the value for the Solow residual, or the constant A, is simply going to be 0. And that's simply because there's no growth or contribution to YP growth that stems from technological improvements. It then tells us that the labor force is growing at a rate of 3.4% a year. So we could think of this guy as the percentage change in the labor force or the population, the stock of labor that is available. It then tells us that capital stock is growing at 3.3%, and so we can argue that the percentage change in K is 3.3%. Finally, we're told that the share of labor income in national income is 60%. And so we can argue that 1 minus F is the share of labor income in national income. It happens to be 0.6 or 60%. And F is evidently going to be the balance or the share of capital income in national income. So that's going to be the remaining 40% or 1 minus 0.6. And that's simply because these two concepts must always add up to 100%. One thing I want to point out is that different textbooks are going to use different notation or different variables. So I like to think of the variable F as the share of capital income in national income, and 1 minus F as the share of labor income in national income. Now that we've gone through the problem and identified the variables that are offered to us, let us try to answer the actual question. So the question is asking us, how fast is potential GDP gonna grow? Prior to answering the question, just to go over the concept a little bit, I would like for us to visualize what is going on. This concept talks about what are all the factors that are able to increase YP, that are able to make potential output grow. So essentially what we're dealing with is the long run model of the goods market. And in this model, on the x-axis, we simply place Y, which is a symbol for real GDP, real income, real output, or real expenditures. These are all synonyms. And on the y-axis, we're going to place pi, which is essentially a symbol for the general price level. This is not the price of an individual good or service, but rather a price index, the general price level of all goods and services in the economy. We have a downward sloping demand curve, AD, and we have a constant YP, or long run aggregate supply. And so the equilibrium in the long run is essentially determined by the intersection or the sweet spot between these two curves, YP and AD. That's what determines the level of output, which is essentially the same as the potential output and the equilibrium price level. Now at first it's important to understand why it is that YP is assumed to be constant. The reason why YP is constant is simply because Mother Earth has a fixed amount of resource that is available. And so even if you used up all of this resource, regardless of what price you sell it for, there's only going to be so much possible output that you could produce. To make you better understand that, if I were to argue that there are 12 awake hours each day, then regardless of how much I sell tutorials for, I can only work 12 possible hours each day. And that's because that resource is fixed. And now this model is trying to talk about what are the factors that can cause YP to essentially increase. And this growth in YP essentially stems from 3 different factors. One reason why YP could shift to the right or increase or grow is if we have a growth in labor stock. If there's more labor stock that is available, now the economy can perhaps produce a greater level of output. A second factor that can contribute to the growth in YP is capital accumulation, or the growth in capital stock. So if there's a greater availability of machinery and equipment, perhaps the economy would be able to make or produce more output. The third source of growth, which is the most sustainable source of growth, is growth that stems from technological improvements. So this is growth that essentially increases factor productivity, so it makes your labor and your capital more productive than it currently is. And that essentially causes per capita GDP to increase, and therefore it is considered the most sustainable source of long-run economic growth. And now, the variables that are essentially offered to us are summarizing what are the contributions to growth. There's no growth from technology. The labor force is growing at a rate of 3.4%, and capital accumulation is at a rate of 3.3%. And we also know that the share of labor income and national income happens to be 60%. So now that we've understood this, let's try to apply the Solow growth equation and calculate the growth that's going to happen in YP given these inputs. So the next step would simply be to express the Solow growth equation and to substitute the given values and to solve for the growth rate in YP. So the Solow growth equation simply argues that the growth in potential GDP, the percentage change in YP, is A, which is Solow's residual, the contribution of technological improvement, plus F times the percentage change in K, plus 1 minus F times the percentage change in L. And so now if I were to substitute the values, I would have 0 for A, 0.4 times 3.3 as the share of capital, and 0.6 times 3.4 as the labor contribution. If you were to evaluate this, you'd get an answer of 3.36% as the final answer. So I hope that helps, and I hope that you guys keep posting your questions on this group. We're trying to build a community here, so make sure you guys tag your friends. If this video can help anybody else that you know in the class, make sure you let them know. It's good to be a good friend, I guess, and I wish you guys the best of luck for your exam. Row out.